easy.
Were they lost? Were they lost?
They were very lost. A couple of big tree service trucks with a wood chipper behind one of them, and people get lost. They come to the end of the road here and they turn around, which is no problem. But you get service people, and they're convinced they've got the right address, and they don't. And then they have to get out, so you have to back up one truck, the one with the wood chipper, and drive the other one around. And, I mean, you can get a good-sized truck around here. We have a circular driveway, but not if you're pulling trailers and stuff. So
Well,
I felt bad for them. It's Monday morning, and they got to start out with they got the wrong number for the right street or the right number for the wrong street. And I was a three-man crew. I just felt really bad for them.
right.
Anyway. Resume.
Absolutely. I think a nice segue was we were talking about the environment. You mentioned that we could meet up to those challenges, the awakening and higher technology that could be considered magic for those who don't understand it. Some of the things flipping on the switch could be considered magic in these days, but we take it as granted. But we were segueing into the environmentalism about it,
Sure.
Which I think that was one of your reasons for your travels. You see how different people interact with the environment. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I'm eating a breakfast bar, so hopefully that won't screw up your recording.
No, that's quite all right.
When I started writing science fiction, I thought people like Asimov and Heinlein and all those people were always traveling, because I didn't understand how you could write about other cultures and other environments without experiencing them for yourself. And I was shocked and disappointed to learn that most of their traveling consisted of researching in National Geographic and Nature magazine. And all I ever wanted to do was travel. That's one of the main reasons I started writing science fiction. But as far as the environment goes, it's painful. The basic answer is there are too many people on the planet. And people don't realize that we're on this big round spaceship. It's an enclosed environment. There's no getting off it. And there's a finite amount of resources. And we get a little better each few years out of extracting those resources and recycling those resources. But we better learn how to recycle everything pretty quick and get our population under control. Or it doesn't matter if we get to Mars or Titan or any place else, because we're kind of wrecking our own house. And I've talked to people in other countries who've seen this happen. There was an old lady who grew up on a farm in northern Namibia near the Skeleton Coast, and she said they used to see lions on the beach all the time. The lions would hunt seals. Remarkable behavior that you can't see today, because the cattle hunters in the north of Namibia got a hold of guns and killed all the lions. They're trying to restore that now, but they're not quite there. Things like that, because if you don't experience them and you don't learn about them from history, you presume they didn't exist. Young people today, even though they intellectually know otherwise, they assume that the internet always existed, and how the heck did people get along every day without it? And what is this wire that connects part of your telephone to the wall and things like that? From an environmental standpoint, I've been writing for years that the only real environments, natural environments that are going to survive, plants and animals, are going to be in national parks and reserves, guarded by dedicated rangers with orders to shoot to kill. And that sounds kind of harsh, but that's pretty much where some of the parks in Africa are at right now.
Yeah.
It's true of Kruger in South Africa, and it's true in parks in Kenya, places like Tsavo. And they're not having a lot of success with it, because the poachers get weapons of their own. And then in Brazil, you have the problem where the government is actually encouraging the destruction of the environment for profit, and it's such a big place that it's impossible for the government to keep watch over it all. Money trumps good feelings every time, and it's difficult. Never mind the people who are doing it for profit. It's very hard to tell, for example, a group of villagers in Botswana who have been trying to get by raising crops, that they can't shoot elephants, come in and destroy all their crops and eat what's left. Plus, an elephant will feed a lot of people. From the standpoint of the villager, the logic of it is, well, don't shoot the elephant. It doesn't fly. You have to convince people on the ground, people who live in an area, that the environment is worth protecting. And there are places where they do that successfully. But it takes a concerted effort on the part of private parties and the government. There's a wonderful place in western Brazil called Mamirawa, which is where the Amazon meets a major tributary, and the area in between them floods for 6 months out of the year, sometimes to a depth of almost 100 feet. And you have remarkable sights like pink dolphins swimming in among the trees in the forest. And what they did what the people who were responsible for establishing the park did with Mamirawa is they involved all of the local people who were living there. They didn't kick them out. They said, look, we can bring tourists in here who will pay money to see these remarkable things, and you all will get a share of it. And as a result, the park has remained fairly pristine. In fact, when I was there, and the local fellow and I were coming back in a boat, we saw some local people making an arrest. There were two guys poaching caiman, which is a kind of crocodile. So if you get the local people involved and they see that there's money to be had for them, maybe even more money to be had than from farming, you can maintain things. They're doing this in Kenya with the Maasai and the Samburu, who are related to the Maasai. Interestingly enough, they let the Maasai and the Samburu graze their cattle on lands that are privately owned, and as a result, the tribes people get a share of the tourist money, because there are little tourist lodges scattered all around this very large area. They get a share of the tourist money, and in return, they don't do things like poison lions. So it can be done, but an effort has to be made.
No.
You have to involve people on a local level. Same thing with tiger preserves in India. They did it a little differently there. They moved people out of the preserves, but they get payments too. They share the tourist money. The local people are not involved. They don't care. Maybe a few of them do. But mostly it's like, look, we have to eat. I've got kids, and grandma's not getting any better, and you're telling me not to go shoot that deer to feed my family because some guy from Scotland might want to come and take a picture of it. You see how the logic works.
Right.
Everybody locally has to be involved, or it simply doesn't work. You know, in more advanced countries, it does work. But even here in the United States, you get hunters, for example, complaining about the fact that there's X number of elk floating around outside Yellowstone. Why can't we shoot the elk inside? You see how this goes. It's always been a difficult proposition, and it's not going to get any easier as the population grows. I'm not optimistic. I wish I were, but it just, where money is involved, it's very difficult. Whether it's uranium mining north of the Grand Canyon to get out of Africa for a minute, or hunting, near or in national parks, it's just it's difficult. Or you have a wackadoodle for president who decides to take a national monument like Bears Ears and chop a third or half out of it, and then open the open part to oil and gas interests, which we shouldn't be doing anyway, because we're moving to renewables. But unfortunately, people who go into politics, a lot of them, they may have a formal education, but they don't have a real-world education.
No, and I think that's a shame of it. If not just to briefly do it, because I know everybody has their own opinions about politics.
Sure.
It's just to briefly say it. I think a lot of reasons why our politics fails is because the leaders that run really don't understand who they're running for, and they don't really have that life experience, as you mentioned, compared to the educational experience. So a lot of them is just about theories, about hypotheticals, instead of seeing what reality kind of brings you and how to resolve it. Because if you really don't know what the problem is, or what the cause of the problem is, how can you ever resolve it? It's like the doctor looking at a patient and not knowing the exact symptom of why the patient being ill, and just treating it, just hoping that it'll get better, and eventually, either the patient does, or they pass away. So that's that's how that's how, that's how I go with politics on that.
Yeah. We have ample evidence of that going on right now. I mean, if I could make it a law, I would require that any newly elected senator or congressman would have to visit at least three different countries, preferably on three different continents, and stay in a mid-range hotel and eat in mid-range restaurants, because we don't want to, inflict torment on our poor elected officials. And get out and meet the local people, not just local government officials or local scientists. Just get out and wander the streets, buy food from street vendors, talk to the people, maybe, rent a car, drive around the country, or have somebody drive them, and get a feel for some different cultures and different places and different environments, and see what's going on for themselves. I think we'd have a much more mature Congress if we did that. But I don't make the laws, so.
All right. I think part of it is reflective of us as a society as well. I think we have to encourage people that have experienced world travel, that has experience, kind of like what you said, and kind of urge them or encourage them to say, look, you don't want to be a politician, but because you don't want to be a politician, that's why you're the right person, because you want to do the best job you can. And I think that's going to be an uphill concerted effort, is that we have, as much as we have to do, these activism into, or these awareness into the environment, like you're saying, we have to kind of buy in our citizens, our normal citizens, not the current establishment institutionalized politicians that we have right now, but our normal citizens into running and saying, what the local issue is, and we kind of, work at it to kind of build that mature congressman. And I think a lot of failing from my generation is that we kind of became indifferent or apathetic to the government. I think that was the sentiment that I felt when I was going into college, and I think I see that more persuasive or pervasive in this next generation as well.
Another part of the problem is the people who should be running things aren't running things.
Mm-hmm.
They're off starting businesses or making wood carvings out of logs in Idaho. There are two types of people who go into government. People who want a steady job, and people who are after power. And a third type, rich people who are bored and need a hobby. If you took all of the wealthy people and the power-hungry people out of Congress, you wouldn't have any Congress left. Oh, there might be a few congressmen here and there, but basically they don't go in because they really want to help people. They may say they do, but they don't. That's not what they want. And once they get in, I don't want to say they're corrupted, but they're trapped. Then suddenly it becomes, particularly if you're a congressman and you've got to run for office every 2 years, wasn't such a big deal maybe in 1820, but it sure is now. You don't have much time to do anything else. I would extend term for congressman to 4 years. This business of nobody can get any work done if they're just trying to work to keep their job after every 2 years. But again,
yeah, I would probably be in agreement as well. 1 term, 4 years. You know.
Well, I don't know about the 1-term thing.
Yeah.
Oh, you mean term limits? Oh, no, it becomes a trade-off between people who get encrusted in office and losing experience.
Right.
You can't really run a company if you fire everybody every 4 years and hire a whole new group of people. It has to be a trade-off. That's what the election process is for. I mean, we do have term limits for the presidency, but not for senators or representatives. Now, if you wanted to make it 20 years or 25 years even, I would go along with that, because that would prevent you from having, people who are simply there to be there, like Strom Thurmond, who was in Congress until his 90s and was long past the point of doing anything useful.
Right, and I think that's...
Again, you balance, like with everything else.
It's all checks and balance, and there's a lot of studies. But I think what's important as well is just starting that conversation. I know that people have been talking about it for some time, but there hasn't been really serious discussions, or serious discussion hasn't presented myself before me, and I don't know if that's because I'm not in those circles, or because they're muted, or people are afraid of just having those conversations out in the open kind of deal.
Well, I don't work in Hollywood or politics because I always say what I'm thinking. That will not get you elected or a big movie deal, generally speaking, and it's unfortunate. That's why I have high hopes, as opposed to some people, for artificial intelligence. I did a book once called The Iron Side, where, as a background, there's this enormous computer system buried in a mountain outside of Zurich in Switzerland called the Caligatark, and it doesn't give any orders. It's not Skynet. But what it does is make recommendations. Well, you should probably plant on this day in May and harvest on this day in September, and use this amount of water and this percentage of this particular fertilizer. Or if you have a heart condition, you should go see this doctor in this hospital, have this procedure done. None of these are orders, they're just recommendations. But if the artificial intelligence turns out to be right all the time, people will start listening to it. And if we have that kind of artificial intelligence one day in the future that starts making those kind of recommendations, and it's always right, or let's say it's right 98% of the time, smart people will start taking those recommendations. And if those extend to government as well, maybe, just maybe, we'll get ourselves out of the hole we're digging for ourselves. Of course, then, the key problem for that becomes, who monitors the giant computer system and who takes care of security. But I think those problems are solvable.
Right, and the machine learns because it's intelligence as well. So
that's right.
Basically, it's deciding, why am I doing all these recommendations for irrational, half intelligence, half reasoning, mammalian creatures?
You might see that kind of artificial intelligence. I won't, but you might. Lots of things are moving there, really quickly.
I mean, right now they're already thinking of nano machines that would go into your body and repair everything.
That's right.
There already been talk, what you were mentioning earlier, about thought process. Elon Musk thinking about chips, but the idea of self-aware technology where it's in tune with thought process. I think CERN with the chameleon neutron, where if it's observed, it becomes anything that it's nearby. And I wonder if that... Go ahead.
Go
I was going to say, and I wonder, because of the quantum level of that situation, that could be applicable to the thought process where observable reality, it's basically we look at the console, we look at the hologram or whatever interface we're doing because we are aware of it and in tune with it, that we would make the machine do what we want in that regards. That's a basis, going into that.
Now you're getting to the point to where we're talking about. We're probably not talking 400 years in the future. We're probably talking maybe a couple of hundred at the most, where it becomes magic.
Right.
And to most people, when you try to explain, even on the most basic level, something like quantum entanglement, for example, as a basis for teleportation, you lose it. You just get blank stares, and it's understandable. And that's what you would have gotten a couple of hundred years ago, trying to explain an iPhone. You just get blank stares because the points of reference aren't there. One of these days, something like what you're talking about may be as common as a cell phone. And you'll step into a booth and be quantum entangled with your duplicate in Tahiti, and all the airlines will go out of business. But we don't know. We don't know. But it's wonderful to speculate. There are so many wonderful possibilities. Just what you're talking about there. Imagine everybody's so focused, for example, on starships, because starships are very photogenic. But say that we do develop something like a simple teleportation system. Of course, what shows up on the other end will not be you; it will be an exact duplicate of you. But let's not get into details. But that can solve the problem of traveling to other star systems. Is if we can send a probe out and establish some kind of a station on, say, one of the worlds circling the Centauri system, then we don't need a starship. We just do the entanglement bit. And we go from here to there. Bingo. No time lost at all. But you don't see much of that in science fiction because it's not photogenic on the page either. Starships are much more fun to talk about.
Right. No.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, no. One of the things that, if we're talking about hard science, is we have the guidelines of space travel, which is the stars. It's the light shining from the stars coming here. It's already billions of years, so they hit every crook and cranny that's in space to get to us. We could just use that as a guidepost to kind of teleport ourselves if we're going into whatever level is there. The only question is if following that guideline, we are going back in time as well, and that's time travel right there because we're following billions of years of light space or light years.
It's all magic anyway, Brent.
Hocus pocus.
Science involved. It's all magic. I mean, the idea that you can put little tiny bubbles in drinks and make them fizzy—that's magic. Nobody imagined that. So many basic things. That's the thing. Science fiction sometimes gets the big stuff right. I'll recommend you read a short story called A Logic Named Joe by Murray Leinster, which came out in Astounding in 1946, and very accurately predicts the internet and the home computer. That's 1946, so once in a while a science fiction writer will hit something and get it right. But the idea that other people in 1946 could have envisioned something like the internet or the home computer, when I believe there were 6 computers on the entire planet, and they took up entire buildings. And that's not that long ago. That's one lifetime. We're talking 70 years to go from gigantic machines full of vacuum tubes called UNIVAC down to something you can hold in your hand, which is much more powerful. And that's only 70 years. I'd love to be around 70. I've seen a lot of changes in my lifetime, obviously. My grandmother, who was born in 1895 in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, my mother asked her one time when grandmother was in her late 80s, what was the most astonishing scientific development she'd seen in her lifetime. And my mother expected an answer something like air travel or atomic power, and my grandmother said television. The idea that you would have a little box in your room that would bring in images of people from distant places. And we wouldn't think of that. You know, ask somebody my age today what they think the greatest scientific development they've seen is, and that's easy for me. That's the internet. But solar power, wind power, arguably might be far more important in the future, or something we can't even envision. I doubt that the guys who invented the laser thought that its greatest application would be in entertainment. So there's wonderful things going on, and I'm sure space travel will get there too, if we, again, allow ourselves to.
Yeah, and I think that's the hopeful part of technology as well, that we envision overcoming these challenges to continue moving forward. And I think that's a role that speculative fiction kind of influence. And I think that we really need more positive, not dystopia inputs, but more utopian, or not even utopian, but more optimistic and hopeful information. And I think H.G. Wells back in the day was quoted saying, we're like computers, and whatever we input, because at that time humans are called computers, they did all the calculations. Whatever you input in a person's mind, you're influencing the outcome of it. So I think a real thing he was railing against is we got to stop doing so many, even though they're exciting and adventurous stories, we have to think of more positive stories, speculatively at least, where it's outcome. And I think a lot of influence from those novels, from those stories is, we do cautionary tales, but we also need to do optimistic tales as well.
Well, this conversation, not accepted. Everything I write is optimistic.
No,
even the most downbeat book I ever wrote, The Man Who Used the Universe, has an optimistic ending, or at least a positive ending, I probably should say.
Right.
Because that's just the kind of person I am. So I'm not necessarily, when I write, looking at things objectively from the standpoint of optimistic versus pessimistic. It's just the kind of person I am. Because if you're just going to be pessimistic all the time, then you're going to write doom and gloom all the time. And there are plenty of dystopian novels out there. And that's just not who I am. It's not what I want to do. So, okay, here comes a phone call from my wife. This has been just charming.
All right.
If you have anything else you want to ask, you can always send me an email.
Absolutely. I'm in communication with you.
Have a good day, and this is fun. This is always fun. And despite what I've said a few times here, I am an optimist. Can't be anything else, or you just go, cut your throat. And there's no future in suicide. That's what I try to tell depressed people.
Right.
It's okay, but there's no future in it. So take care of yourself, be well, stay safe, and maybe I'll talk to you again sometime in the future.
Absolutely. Thank you, Alan, for speaking with me. It's been an honor.
You're welcome, Brent.
Bye.